month's material. So lots to cover this month. I mean, I truly believe that July is one of the most critical months in all of beekeeping. You know, taking care of your bees properly in July, August, and September is absolutely essential for you to keep your bees alive. So I'm so thrilled. We've got a great group on here, great, huge group on here tonight. It's easy to start ignoring our bees when it gets so hot outside, because most of us don't want to be outside when it's 105 degrees and working our bees. And I wouldn't recommend that. I'd recommend working them early in the morning or late evening when it's, you know, only 85, 90 degrees. But we can't stop taking care of our bees because it's hot outside. We don't have to be out there every week, but there are critical things to do to keep our bees healthy. So before we jump into that though, some quick side notes. We have summer bees available. So if one of your beehives died, or you're just getting into beekeeping, we do have summer bees still available. We'll be selling these through the month of August. They're complete hives with a marked queen, comes with all the equipment ready to go, ready to plug into your bee yard. And so we've got plenty of these available. You can order them and pick them up, you know, same week. There's no waiting list. You can go to any of our branches and place an order, pick them up, and you're into beekeeping. These hives are ready for a second box. So as soon as you get them home, you'll want to put a second box on them and start feeding them. We have a whole booklet that we give you if you order our summer bees, a whole little booklet on, hey, you just got bees, it's the middle of the summer, here's how to keep them healthy through the summer. So that'll be helpful to you. I'm so excited about this. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about it. We're going to send a email out next week to our Texas Bee Supply mailing list with some videos of me kind of showing the pros and of all these different gloves. But we have just invented 4 different styles of gloves that we just launched on our website this week and in store. And I'm not going to take up a ton of time on this because you guys don't want to be sold at, and that's not my intention. But I am excited about these. We've basically spent 4 or 5 years trying a wide variety of styles of gloves. We'll go to our manufacturer, we'll create a glove, we'll use it commercially and share it with hobby beekeepers for several months. We'll go back and make changes. And after a lot of trial and error, here are just 3 on this picture, but there's about 4 different styles of glove that we created and just launched. This one on the left here, by the way, these yellow ones are super tough cowhide gloves. They're really soft on the inside, but really, really tough gloves that are virtually impossible for bees to sting through. And this one on the far left, what's really cool is it has Velcro instead of elastic. So I don't know about you guys, but for me, one of the first ways my gloves often fail is that elastic around the wrist or the arm. The elastic stops being elastic. And you pretty much have to throw the glove away because then bees can get right in it once that elastic fails. And so I said, hey, I want to develop a glove that doesn't have that problem. Sometimes the elastic's too tight, sometimes it's not tight enough. And so we developed this glove that instead of elastic, it has Velcro and a Velcro loop on it. And so you just pull that band and tighten it as tight or as loose as you want and Velcro it shut. And it kind of does away with the elastic. So you don't have to worry about the elastic giving out anymore. So super cool. I use this one all the time. This middle one is a really tough cowhide glove, but instead of a really long gauntlet that like comes way up your arm and all the way to your elbow, it's a very short gauntlet that just covers your wrist. This tough canvas material here. And the cool thing about that, the reason we created that is there are a lot of beekeepers that don't want that big long gauntlet that comes way up your arm. In the summertime, it gets really hot and kind of ruins the ventilation to your arm. But then it's also somewhat unnecessary when you've got a triple layer bee suit to cover your whole arm with a gauntlet. And then a lot of beekeepers just use work gloves. They just like using normal old work gloves instead of bee gloves when they're working their bees. The problem with work gloves is, as we know, if you've worn them, you're getting stung on the wrist all the time because that's where the work glove ends. So we basically made a work glove with a 3 to 4 inch gauntlet that just basically covers your wrist and keeps you from getting stung on the wrist, but it's not covering the rest of your arm. And then this one on the far right, similar, that's our goat skin. So it's super soft And the gauntlet is a ripcord type material. So it's like a really lightweight, ultra lightweight material, kind of like a tent. If you go tent camping, it's kind of that kind of material, but breathable. And it's like ultra lightweight. And so it feels like you're not wearing anything but a work glove. So anyway, and then we've got another one like this one on the far right that's got a full length gauntlet with that ripstop material that's just ultra lightweight, feels like you're not wearing a glove at all. So anyway, enough on that. We'll send a video out next week, but I'm pretty pumped about these gloves, and I think you'll love them too. Sherry, do you want to fill us in on what's going on in this month's magazine? I know it's a big one. So tell us what's going on this month.
That's a technical term. It's a big one.
It is.
It's 78 pages, and I know that's a lot, but gosh, y'all, there was so much to talk about. We've got, I'm just going real quick, Varroa mites with printable sheets. There's several different things in the magazine that has a little printer friendly, or I say at the top, you can print this page. It really makes you be able to take this out to your bee yard or put it in your binder, because we know we all have a binder. Like you did summer splits, which is an excellent topic since we're going to be doing a splits class this weekend ourselves. Requeening in summer, gosh, trickle feeding, summer hive care, storing supers, all of these. That's why it ended up so big. There was just a lot to say. With a lot to say. So everybody, please, it's going to be good. August, I promise, is going to be smaller. But enjoy it, download it, read it.
Thanks, Sherry. Great job as always. And you're right. I mean, it's so important that July is such an important month. So I'd highly encourage you to check out this month's magazine. Okay, so let's jump out to the bee yard, and I'm going to apologize in advance. Usually I don't edit the videos a whole lot, but I at least watch each video through. And I literally got back to the office like 10 minutes before I had to start the webinar. So I kind of had to throw the videos up there. So hopefully there's nothing that should have been edited out here. But let's jump out into the bee yard and see what the bees were doing in such a hot day. So here we go out into the bee yard.
Hey guys, so it is hot today. We're looking at about it's a little over 100 degrees. It's middle of the afternoon, so it's incredibly hot out here. And so I'm eager to get into these bees and see what they're doing in this kind of heat. It's always interesting to look at bees at different times of day. I don't recommend looking at bees in the middle of the day like this. This time of year, I'm working bees first thing in the morning or late in the evening. And that's for my sake as well as the bees. I mean, when it's this hot outside, it's just brutal for us as humans, and it's tough on the bees to have their hive opened up and their thermoregulation messed up as well. So I don't recommend spending a lot of time in your bees in the heat of the day like this. But for today, it's interesting to look at the bee population and look at what's going on in the hives. But some things I'm going to be looking really closely for is signs that my hives are shutting down. I'm expecting them to start shutting down as hot and as dry as it is. I expect the brood production to be dropping. I expect them to be eating some of their honey. This bee yard, we haven't pulled the honey yet. It should be pulled by now, but we're going to pull it in the next couple of days. In most areas, the honey flow is long since over. And so we're going to check and see if these bees have started eating their own honey yet. And then we're going to pay close attention to what we need to be doing next on these bees to get them through this hot and dry of a summer. So let's jump in and see what we've got going on today. Okay, so this hive in particular still has 2 medium supers of honey on top of it. And last we checked it, they had quite a bit of honey in both of these supers. And so it should be time to harvest honey. It should be past time to harvest honey. Let's see what these bees are doing as we get into the summer. We've still got a pretty good bee population up on top. Even though it's the heat of the day, those telescoping covers do a pretty good job of keeping these hives insulated. And so let's see what they're doing. So this upper super, I can already see, is pretty much completely full of honey. So they have packed it out. Beautiful, look at that. Just a beautiful capped frame of honey. Now, I would say this is ready to harvest. I mean, yeah, they still haven't capped some of that honey in the middle, but they've capped everything around the edge. It's well into July, it's incredibly hot. I mean, we can do a shake test, you know, and nothing comes out at all. when it gets this hot and this dry, you know, the bees just often stop capping honey. And so, you know, I'm not worried when most of the frame is capped, it's hot and it's dry outside. I would go ahead and harvest this even if it's not fully capped over. But this top medium is full of honey. I can lift up on it and yeah, it's full. So it's probably got, you know, I'm gonna say about 40 pounds of honey in it. Now this is a hive that we had bottom supered last month with foundation. So we put a medium box of foundation on the bottom, and let's see what they've done with it. So they've drawn some of it out. They've drawn, as you can see, they've drawn some of these frames out, but they didn't draw them all out. We did some checkerboarding of previously drawn frames, and those they pretty much filled with honey. But I am starting to see, look at this frame in the bottom. So that whole middle area has been completely cleared out of honey. So they're starting to eat the honey that's left on the hive. You know, when you see these supers and they've got drawn comb, but the bees have cleared all the honey out of that drawn comb, it's a good sign that the honey flow is completely over and the bees are actually starting to consume this honey. So you can see it on this frame too. You've got honey around the edge, but all the honey's cleared out in the middle. So I would expect to see that. I mean, in my opinion, in most areas of the South, the honey flow ended, you know, 2 to 3 weeks ago. And so I'm expecting to see the bees now eat that honey rather than bring in a surplus. So we're gonna get these hives extracted quickly before they eat all the honey. And then we'll probably need to do some feeding afterwards to replenish their stores. I want to make sure the second box on these hives has at least 30 pounds of stored honey or syrup in it. So after we harvest this honey, if there's not 20 or 30 pounds left in the bottom brood box, we're going to quickly start feeding. So let's see what's going on down in the bottom brood box. What's going on with the bee population. Let me adjust this for you here a little bit. So we've got a pretty good bee population, but I will say, I never try to judge the bee population in the middle of a hot day. There's just too many bees outside the hive where it's cooler to accurately judge the bee population. If I'm trying to get a good feel for the adult bee population in a hive, I'm going to be looking early in the morning or very late in the day. That's when you're going to have most of the bees inside the hive. So look at that. This is one of our Texas 5000, I believe, queens. Beautiful frames of brood. They've still got some pollen, but not a tremendous amount. That's something I'm really looking for this year, is how much pollen do these hives have in them? Because if I'm not seeing more than a cumulative half frame of pollen, then I'm going to be feeding some pollen patties. And as hot and as dry as this summer's turning out to be, I'm going to go ahead and start feeding pollen patties pretty quick here. So this hive has a pretty good amount of brood, really. They've got about 6 frames of brood, which, as hot and as dry as it is, that's not bad. They've got, let's see, they've got some brood on a 7th frame. So 6.5 to 7 frames of brood. And the brood looks healthy. But I'm not seeing a tremendous amount of pollen. A lot of the pollen I am seeing, which you might be able to see on that edge there, that yellow pollen, a lot of the pollen is just one single color, which means that our pollen sources, the variety of pollen that the bees could be bringing in is dwindling. As a lot of those wildflowers dry up, they're really only pulling in pollen from a couple kinds of flowers. So some years we don't have to start feeding pollen substitute until August or September. This year in general, I'm recommending we start a little bit earlier, so sometime in July, because it's just getting so hot and dry. We don't want to risk nutritionally starving our bees. So this is a great hive. I mean, they've got some beautiful brood. The queen is still laying well, but I am starting to see less and less pollen in these hives. And so I'm going to start feeding pollen substitute pretty quickly. And I'm not seeing a lot of stored honey down in their bottom brood box. There's still quite a bit of brood, but they've only got a little bit of honey around that brood. And then we're going to pull the honey off these top 2 boxes, and then they're not going to have hardly any honey stores. So we'll be feeding these hives pretty aggressively as well. So one thing about this bee yard, we're here at the Collin County Sheriff's Office bee yard again. And about half of this bee yard is in the shade in the heat of the afternoon. The other half is in full sun. And you can always tell a difference just watching the bee activity. You know, there's more bees coming and going from the hives in the shade, and there's more bee population inside these hives in the heat of the day. In the summer, my perfect configuration is to have bee yards that are in the full sun in the morning and the afternoon, but some trees can give them some shade. I'm sorry, full sun in the morning and late in the evening, but you have trees positioned in a way that they can get some afternoon, at least partial shade. And that helps a lot when bees are over summering in Texas. In the spring, in the fall, in the winter, I don't really care. I'd rather them be in full sun. But a little bit of shade in the hot afternoons, especially when we have triple-digit temperatures, is really helpful. And you can create that shade. I know people that get beach umbrellas. I know people that get a little bit of shade screen and put it over the hive. That's helpful. The biggest thing though is just to make sure they're not a single-story hive. Having at least 2 boxes total really helps keep them cooler and creates a bit of a heat barrier. Having a telescoping cover with an inner cover is helpful as well. Or if you have just a flat piece of wood for a lid, putting 2 lids on it can help. Anything to give them a little bit of a heat barrier from that sun beating down on them is helpful. But this hive is, as I was looking at it a second ago, it clearly has more bees in it than the last hive we looked at. Now they're pretty equivalent on strength, but it looks like there's more bees because it's in the shade, and so there's more of that bee population in the hive. This one again just has a super of honey on it that's ready to harvest. Just a beautiful, beautiful frame. Look at that of honey. Just gorgeous. You know, it's ready to harvest. Completely capped. Usually the stronger hives cap over more honey than the weaker hives, but this time of year it's okay to go ahead and harvest. I mean, we're well into July and it's time to harvest. Interestingly, you'll also notice that bees seem to be a little more defensive in the shade than when they're in the full sun. And I think that's because of several factors. One, I think there's more of the foragers in the hive during the heat of the day, which are a little more grumpy, versus the hive in the full sun. More of those foragers are out, staying cool out of the hive, or they're underneath the bottom board or in the very bottom box so they're not bothering you. So I think that certainly contributes to bees seeming a little more defensive when they're actually in the shade. So we've got a completely full medium box here. It's ready to harvest. We have our queen excluder. And then we've got 2 deep boxes for our brood nests. Now what you'll often see, let's see what this hive is, but when you have a second deep as a brood box, sometimes they don't need that much space for the brood, and they'll just fill up this second brood box with honey. And so that's kind of what they've done here. I mean, there's a little bit of eggs and larvae on this frame, but it's pretty much just a frame full of honey in the very middle. And if you go to these outside frames, they're completely full of honey as well. So if you have a deep box, a second deep box or a brood box, and it's just completely full of honey, and there's only 1 or 2 frames of brood in there, it's fine to pull out 2 or 3 or 4 frames of honey out of your second brood box and harvest them. And when you're done harvesting them, you put them right back in that second brood box, and the key is you feed a couple gallons of syrup once you harvest that honey to make sure you replenish those food stores. But there's nothing wrong with pulling some frames of honey out of the second brood box and extracting it if you just really want more honey, or you may not have ever put on a super. They may never have been strong enough to move up into a third box and you just have 2 brood boxes. If that's the case, and you really want some honey, maybe it's your first year in beekeeping, it's fine to pull a couple frames of honey out of the second brood box, extract them, and put them back in. Just feed right away to replenish those stores. But it's a great way to get a few frames of honey if you just really want the honey. So I just want to show an example really quickly. I know it's going to be a little hard to see in the video, but this hive is a deep box and a medium box. So just 2 brood nests, no honey supers on top. And when I open the lid, even in the heat of the day, there is just quite a significant bee population. Now, when they're this full of bees, and I'm going to try to give you a better view of it. You know, this top box is far more than 80% full of bees. It's pretty much, you know, pretty much 100% full of bees. You know, I can see bees between every frame, and got some bees kind of hanging on the edges here. It's just really packed full of bees in the second box, even in the heat of the day, which is saying something because usually, you know, most of the bees are out foraging during the heat of the day. So when I have a hive like this in the middle of the summer, it's just totally packed out with bees, I'm gonna put another box on top of it because that'll really help keep them cool. It's not that I expect them to do a whole lot with that second box, but I'm gonna go ahead and put a second box, either a deep or a medium, on top of it, and just to give them some space from the heat. And so it could be a box of foundation, and you could trickle feed through the summer, and they might go ahead and just draw out that box of foundation, and then you've got more comb for next year. Or it could be a box of comb, and you only feed them as needed, and they may or may not store anything in that second or that third box. But when I have hives that are just totally packed out with bees this time of year when it's this hot, I want to give them a little extra space as a heat barrier. And so we're going to give this one a medium box of foundation, and we'll give them about 1/4 to 1/3 of a gallon of syrup per week. And by August or September, they'll probably have that third medium box completely drawn out with comb, and I'll have more comb ready to go for next year. And on top of that, they'll have more heat barrier from that hot sun pounding down on top of the lid. Hey guys, so as soon as I opened up this hive, I knew we had a problem because there was nothing up in their honey super. There was nothing up in their second brood box. This was a hive that about a month ago we found was queenless, and so we put a frame of eggs and larvae into it, hoping that they would raise their own queen. And so we're gonna check it. The bee population is very low. Again, it's hard to tell in the hot sun like this, but it only really has 2 or 3 frames worth of bees. So something's going on in here, and we wanna figure out what it is. We wanna see if they raised the new queen or if something else happened. And right away we can see that there's really no visible brood on these middle frames, except for this frame where we see some drone brood. Now this hive is a classic drone layer. So they tried to raise their own queen, but probably because it was in the middle of the summer, there wasn't enough drones to mate, and for some reason they didn't raise a queen. So instead they have a drone layer. So they've got worker bees that are laying drones, or they've got a virgin queen that never mated and she is laying drones. And so you can see this brood is just very, very spotty and patchy, and you can see that it's kind of lumpy and sporadic, and it's like this on every single frame in the hive. So it's bumpy, it's kind of bumpy brood, which indicates drone brood instead of working that flat worker bee brood. And then it's very sporadic, kind of in that shotgun pattern. And they only have 1 or 2 frames of brood total like this, which is a kind of a classic sign of a drone layer. And so with a drone layer like this, especially one that's this weak, we're just gonna shake out these bees, and we will set this box out in the shade for a couple of days and let the bees rob the honey out of it, and then we'll store this comb and we'll use it next year. But there's really no saving a hive like this that's this far gone, has this few bees, and it's this time of year. It's just virtually impossible to save them. So you can kind of see more of that bumpy drone brood, and they've only got, again, 1 to 2 frames like this. Very low bee population. So this hive is gonna, we're gonna shake the bees out and store that comb and try again next year. So that, guys, it's hot, it's dry, the honey flow's over, but the bees still look pretty good overall. I was impressed by they still had brood, the queens were still laying well. So even though we've had, this triple digit heat for the past number of weeks, these hives are still doing well. And what I typically find in Texas is that a good, healthy, strong hive, even if it's in the full sun, can still do just fine through the summer heats if they have plenty of food available to them. And if they run short on honey or run short on pollen, or their Varroa mite levels get too high, they can get into big trouble really fast. But if those things are under control, they do a fantastic job of thermoregulating themselves, keeping themselves cool, and pushing through this summer heat. The really weak, small hives have a much harder time with thermoregulation, and that's the hives that tend to die sometimes in this kind of heat. But again, the name of the game in the summer is make sure they've got at least 30 pounds of honey stored in their second brood box after harvest. Make sure that if you're not seeing more than a cumulative half frame of pollen throughout the hive, and if you're not seeing multicolored pollen still throughout the hive, you need to give them some pollen substitute. And you've got to get those mite levels under control. You need to be at 2 mites or less per 100 bees, ideally 0 to 1. And so for most beekeepers, that means you've got to take action against Varroa mites right now. This is the peak season for Varroa mites, which we're going to talk a lot about later tonight in the webinar, which is why I didn't really get into Varroa mites much out here in the bee yard. So keep your bees fed, get that honey harvested, and hopefully we'll pull through this temperatures and we can all look forward to fall.
So there you go, guys. And I'm just gonna say it. I almost didn't film the video today because it was so windy outside, and I didn't have. I'd kind of cut it near the wire and didn't have time to wait for another day like I do sometimes if it's too windy. But good news. I worked with my good friend Charlie Agar, who's the star of the reality TV show Charlie B. You guys have probably, some of you have seen it. And he has set me up with and given me advice on audio equipment to use in the bee yard that does a much better job of sound, even in the wind, and has a special mic that'll be attached to me. So I got it all ordered. And I was short one cord that Amazon isn't going to deliver until tomorrow. So anyway, so next time, I think we finally got the audio under control, and hoping for much better luck next month. So thanks for your patience on that. All right, so July tips. I'm going to spend about 30 to 40 minutes getting into a lot of the nuts and bolts of taking care of your bees in July. And then the Elams are going to talk about mean bees for our last 20 minutes or so, which is really important because we get a lot of folks contacting us this time of year saying, man, I had really gentle bees and now they're mean. What happened? And so James and Sherry will get into diagnosing what happened and why bees sometimes get mean. And if your bees have just been mean all along, what to do about that. So this is an interesting picture. This picture on the left is a field out here in Texas. And it's just getting pretty dry, pretty brown, pretty fast. And on the right, this is North Dakota. This picture is actually from 2 years ago in North Dakota, but this year is similar in that we're getting so much rain out in North Dakota and South Dakota, where our bees are currently, my bees are currently, and they're enjoying the 75-degree weather and the fresh honey flow that's just getting started up there. But it's been raining a lot. Last year was crazy dry, one of the driest years ever up in the Midwest. And this year it just won't stop raining. And that's just normal beekeeping for you. A little tip, if you didn't notice, you may have a hard time seeing, but on these hives, they flooded, as you can see, a couple years ago. The lids on these hives, we've scooted the lids back a couple inches. Something that, when it's this wet and this flooded, we can't get in there to get the bees out. And if that lid stays closed, what'll happen is when the sun comes out, those bees will overheat because they can't get out the front entrance, obviously, unless they put their scuba gear on. And because they can't get out, that sun will get the hive too hot and the bees will die and they'll cook. And so what you do is you go and you crack the lids open 3 or 4 inches so that the bees can fan the hive and keep it cool until the water goes back down, and they carry on. And sometimes the bees die, sometimes they don't. A lot of times they'll make it, they'll survive as long as they can keep that hive cool when the sun comes back out. So if you ever have your hives flooded, crack that lid so the bees can keep the hive cool. All right, so I love showing this slide, one, just because it's such a refreshing slide in July to look at. It's like, oh man, not that we want Snowmageddon to come back ever again, but this is the time where we think about winter management. And it seems so bizarre, right? It's triple digit temperatures, it's so hot, you know, we're all ready to go up to North Dakota with the bees, we're at 70 degrees. But now is the time to prepare your bees for winter. So for most of the South, you either have harvested your honey or you're getting ready to harvest your honey. And the next big event in beekeeping is winter. And so if you wait until that first cold front blows in to start getting your bees ready for winter, it's far too late. And so July is when we start prepping our bees for winter. And that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. Summer blooms, you know, there's not as much blooming this year as last year. Last year, we had some pretty good summer rains that gave us really a pretty decent pollen flow through a lot of the summer. And I didn't recommend feeding pollen substitute at all until August or September last year. This year is going to be a little different, and we'll talk about that in a second. But we are seeing some of the summer yellow sunflowers. We're seeing the crepe myrtles, some of the thistles. They're starting to bloom. And so we are seeing some summer blooms, just not as much as I would like to see. Some parts of Texas got some decent rains last week, and that'll really, really help those areas. Most of us didn't see any rain at all. Kind of a honey flow outcome. This is just kind of the after the fact report, what I'm hearing, what I've seen. So we had a decently dry spring, and that quickly changed to a very hot and dry summer in most regions. And so overall, it appears that production was sporadic, with many reporting an average harvest. So last year, it was just straight up bad across the state. This year, there are some definite pockets where people made some pretty good crops. Overall, certainly better than last year, but there are some areas that it was just still too dry of a year. This was the Texas drought monitor map, and I pulled this today. And so you can see it's toasty. I mean, it's you know, we're just now at the beginning of July, and most areas of the state are already in a bit of trouble. So, and this map has looked pretty dismal since the beginning of the year. So we'll talk about those implications. I mean, good news, bees are very durable under, you know, as long as we do our part as beekeepers, they'll pull through this just fine. But what we're going to talk about is how we help them with that. So real quick, honey flow is over. I don't really know any regions that are still bringing in a measurable amount of honey. I'm sure somebody else tonight will prove me wrong and say, hey, my bees are still bringing it in. But for 98% of us, it's over, it's done, time to pull honey. Poor rainfall and hot weather is definitely causing hives to begin shutting down some. It's not a dramatic shutdown, but they're certainly pumping the brakes a little bit on brood production. And especially as pollen sources begin to die. Some areas are going to have a better pollen flow than others, and we'll talk about kind of how to figure out what's going on pollen flow wise by looking at your bees. So thank you, Stan, for Stan Gore with Texas Friendly Beekeepers for allowing me to share your slide. I was scrolling through Facebook in bed one evening, and I came across this and just got a kick out of it. I think we just finished watching Obi-Wan Kenobi show or something, and I was like, hey, that's creative, Darth Vader. And then I really love the tip on here, which was you know, we are coming into a dearth, and a great way to tell if you have a nectar dearth is to put out a little bit of sugar water in your bee yard, you know, 20-30 feet away from your hives, and see if the bees are foraging like crazy on that sugar water, see if they're robbing. And if they're not foraging on it at all, you may not be in a dearth. But if they're going crazy drinking that sugar water, you're probably in a dearth. Now, I want to give a caveat to this, because I've tried this many times in the past, because it's one of the ways I kind of tell what's going on in my bees. And it does work, but if that sample container of sugar water or honey that you put out is in full sun in the heat of the day, the bees aren't really going to touch it. A funny thing happens when it's triple digit temperatures. Those bees, they don't care about anything. I mean, if you guys noticed in the bee yard video today, I was, I had my veil off at the very end video. So I had just worked all those hives and still took my veil off in the middle of the bee yard to film the final exit video. And the bees weren't bothering me at all. I mean, it was so hot, they didn't care what was going on. So if you do this test, put it in the shade, and you're gonna get the best results first thing in the morning or late in the evening when the bees are more active to really do a good job of gauging this test. So I wanna ask you guys really quickly how your honey harvest was. So this is a great opportunity for us to kind of take a poll across the South and see, how your bees performed. So the question is, how have you harvested your honey yet? So last month we asked, how much honey your bees had stored, and it was kind of all over the place. But let's see how many of you have harvested honey or not, or maybe you don't plan to harvest. So, okay, so we've got a couple hundred responses so far. It looks like, wow, very evenly split. Actually, exactly. Well, so 36% of you have already harvested, 36% of you have not harvested, and 27% of you do not plan to harvest at all. So 50-50, half of you have already harvested, half of you haven't, and a little bit less, 27% don't plan to harvest at all. So there you go. If you haven't harvested, I would make plans to do so, because the flow is pretty much over. And we're certainly going to enter a period where the bees start consuming any honey that's in those supers. So if you are going to harvest honey, I would get harvested within the next week or two, and then you can feed if they need it, which we'll talk about to replenish those stores. We also are going to have the snow on the mountain or snow on the prairie start blooming. Not quite yet, but 2-3 weeks from now, it'll be blooming, and it'll make your honey taste spicy and not in a good way. We'll talk about it more in August, but it kind of burns your throat when you eat honey made from the snow on the mountain plant. And so it's another good reason to get your honey off sooner than later before that starts blooming. Summer brood. I just want to throw this out there really quickly so people don't panic when they see this in their hives. That frame that I showed you guys with that beautiful brood pattern, that's not normal in the summer. Now you still see it a little bit because we're kind of just coming off the honey flow, but as summer progresses, expect to see your brood get a little more spotty, kind of like this. The bees start storing a little more nectar and pollen kind of mixed in with the brood nest. And it's not uncommon that your brood pattern gets a little more spotty as it gets super hot throughout the summer. So if it's horrible, like that drone layer we saw in the video, that's a problem. But something like this that you see right here, that's pretty normal. That's kind of what I expect a lot of brood to look like during the summer months. Okay, so Varroa mites. Let's jump in here. It's not fun to talk about, but it's so important to talk about. This is the leading cause of hive death. And as we've already talked about, those Varroa mite populations peak in July and August. So we got to talk about how to keep it under control. It's the leading cause of winter death, and winter death is in italics there because, a lot of people don't keep their Varroa mites under control, and their hive is greatly weakened because of it, but they don't actually die out during the summer. And they actually die during the fall or winter. And people go, oh, I guess it got too cold, or I guess something happened this winter that killed my bees. When oftentimes the problem started way back in July when their hive had Varroa mite levels that got too high. Those viruses that the Varroa mites transmit, they can be deadly to a hive and have effects on hive for months after the Varroa mite level is under control. As a commercial beekeeper, I don't ever want to see my Varroa mite levels over 2 or 3 per 100 bees. So I always want them pretty low year round. Keep in mind, a virtual inspection is a visual inspection of Varroa mite populations is pretty much pointless. You got to do a test, which we'll talk about. I'm going to throw this out there too, because we don't have time to talk about Varroa mites and all the different control options for 2 hours, unfortunately. We do have a streaming video that you can watch on demand on our website. So go to our website, look at classes, and then look at advanced virtual classes. $29, it's 2 hours, and it talks about how to control Varroa mites in detail using natural methods, chemical methods, all different methods. So check that out, and that could be a really helpful resource for you. I'd highly encourage you, if you're new to beekeeping, check it out, because there's a lot that we just don't have time to cover tonight.
We'd like to introduce you to the Varroa.
Woo! Sorry, guys. There's a lot we don't have time to cover. Everybody's awake now, right? I'm going to skip that video for the sake of time. It's just a quick introduction video on Varroa mites that we'll talk about all that anyway. So this is a chart I put together just as I watched bees in Texas, and it's pretty applicable over the South on growth trends. And it's really simple. You know, the gray bar is my goal for each month. This is the frames of bees I want in my hive, how many frames of bees, and this is for all the boxes on a hive. So if you've got 2 deeps or 3 deeps, this is the total frames of bees across all boxes. And a frame of bees is just a deep frame covered 2/3 front and back with bees. So the gray bar is my goal. The brown bar is a hive that needs work, and then the greenish color bar is beyond saving. And so this is helpful to refer to as we look at the strength of our bees throughout the summer, fall, winter, etc. I would take a quick picture of this, take a screenshot, and I use this as a helpful guide, so I can kind of assess where I am and what's normal and what's not when it comes to bee population in the South. Similarly, here is the Texas or Southern Varroa threat trends. So this is when we tend to see Varroa mite levels peak, and it follows pretty closely that the growth in our hives that we just saw in the previous slide. So you can see that when the bee population starts to grow, the Varroa mite levels start to grow as well. We start getting really high in July. We start peaking in August, and then it declines in the fall months as our bee population declines. But your beehive will be dead, if it's not controlled after this, after it starts to climb. So the ideal time to get Varroa mites under control is right when you harvest your honey in early July. Pull that honey, take care of Varroa mites, and knock this curve down so that you're way down low in August, and your bees will go into winter healthy. These are just some signs of Varroa mites. We've got a couple of YouTube videos out there on looking through some hives. If you just go to our YouTube channel and search Varroa mite signs or symptoms, or just Varroa, you'll see a video on this. But these are some of the visual signs of Varroa mites. You can see the center picture here. It's a bee with deformed wings. There's a close-up of it up here on the right. Brood that's incredibly spotty, brood that's being uncapped. So in the center picture again here, you see this pupa that's being uncapped because it has Varroa mites. Bees may be pulling out larvae or pupa. They're practicing hygienic behavior, which is a good thing. It also means you have Varroa mites, and it's important to do some testing and see how high the levels are. So there are visual clues, but doing an actual test is very important, because again, if you're just looking for Varroa mites riding around on a bee's back, it's going to be tough to see, because Varroa mites actually prefer, like this picture on the left, to be lodged kind of in between the scales on the underside of a bee's abdomen, making them very difficult to see. And the most damage that's done is in the developing capped brood, and so you're not going to be able to see that. So don't rely on any visual inspection. You need to do some tests. So the best test to do is an alcohol wash. And we've got several videos on our YouTube channel that talk about how to do an alcohol wash. So I'm not going to get into it here. And then I think in August, we'll probably show a video of how to do it in our webinar. But go to our YouTube channel and look at, again, search for Varroa, and you'll see a video on how to do this alcohol wash. I usually test a couple hives. If you've got 5 or 6 hives, I would test 2 or 3 of them. And what you find in those hives is probably going to be applicable to your whole apiary, because the Varroa mites very much spread between hives. So you don't have to test every hive. If you've got, under 10, I would do 30 to 40% of your hives for testing. And then, I recommend testing about every 6 weeks. Certainly do a test right now, and I can pretty much guarantee you it's going to come back with a significant number of Varroa mites. And this is that alcohol wash you can see here on the right. These are those Varroa mites that you can see after that alcohol wash is performed. When you do the alcohol wash, you're going to put about 300 bees in there, and I don't want to see more than about 0 to 3 or 4 mites come out of that wash. And you can see this hive had 40 or 30 or 40 mites, so big problem. I'm going to skip this. You can do you can take a picture of this if you want, or go back and look at the recording. A common test for Varroa mites is called the powdered sugar roll, and I don't recommend it. It's one of the least accurate tests for Varroa mites. You can use it to give you just kind of a feel for Varroa mites. You can, if you do the sugar roll test as these instructions describe, and you get more than 3 or 4 mites, then you have a problem. But it just really isn't terribly accurate of a test. So I would avoid it. If you want to use a method that doesn't kill the bees, like the powdered sugar method doesn't kill bees, but I prefer sticky boards to the powdered sugar method. So here's the directions. It's so simple. It works whether you have a screen bottom board or a standard bottom board. If you have a screen bottom board, you can just shove this sticky board right underneath the screen. If you have a solid bottom board, you can have this black protective cover over it, and you can slide it right in the entrance of the hive. And then you let it sit for 24 hours. And if you come back and in the summer and you have more than 11 mites stuck to that sticky board, you need to take action. Here's some testing rules. I test every 1 to 2 months, March through November. If mites are over 2 per 100 bees using an alcohol wash, then you need to take action. You don't, when you're doing that alcohol wash, you need to use 90% alcohol, or you can use Dawn Ultra dishwashing soap at a tablespoon per gallon of water as the liquid in that alcohol wash. And you're going to use about 2 cups of liquid into your alcohol wash container. You're going to swirl that container for about 60 seconds. It's going to kill the bees you put in it. It'll also dislodge the mites, and then you can count the mites to see what your levels are. Again, check out our video on that for more details. And then we just talked about the sticky board. And then really important, always test after a mite treatment is finished to ensure that the mite treatment actually worked. So real quick, and I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but Varroa control, the industry is certainly in a constant cycle of developing mite treatments, chemical mite treatments to kill bees. The Varroa, sometimes they kill bees. They kill Varroa mites, and then the Varroa mites develop a resistance to that treatment, and we have to develop new treatments. It's this really terrible cycle. And the industry, kind of for the first time, is really agreeing these days that we need to reduce the use of synthetic chemicals in the hives, and that genetics is hopefully our future to controlling Varroa mites. And I would say for the industry, a lot of people have figured out how to control Varroa mites using chemicals largely and keep them at low levels. But it's still with the use of synthetic miticides. So there is increasingly promising research that's occurring in genetics. Several researchers are getting closer and closer and closer to developing bees that are pretty resistant to Varroa mites. In general, we're not quite there. There are pockets and instances where sideline beekeepers have developed bees that are pretty resistant to Varroa mites, and I've used them in my own operation. I've worked with different researchers with pole line bees and VSH bees that are pretty resistant. They lose that resistance pretty quickly after that original queen dies and is replaced by a new queen. And they're not always consistent. And so we're not to the point yet where we can just say, oh, order a VSH queen or a pole line queen or a mite resistant queen from a company, put it in your hive and never worry about mites again. We're getting closer. 5 years ago, I would have said, oh boy, it doesn't look like it's ever going to happen. And now I can say we're getting there. But you know, to quote Randy Oliver, you know, the most mite resistant queens are about 20% mite resistant, you know, and we're just not there yet, but every year does get better. So I'm optimistic about the future. Okay, how to control Varroa mites? You basically have 4 options. Chemical options, which could be Apivar, Apiguard, HopGuard, you know, oxalic acid, you know, any of the chemicals. Number 2 would be mechanical or chemical-free options. 3 would be genetics or breeding. And then 4 would be an IPM approach to all methods. So as you're thinking through what method you want to use to control Varroa mites, not doing anything is not an option. It's, you know, you'll lose your bees if you don't practice any of those. So as you kind of think through what you want to do and what you want to be, you need to be realistic with yourself. Are you going to go to the extremes of, you know, genetics and breeding your own mite resistant bee? Are you going to go out and use a mechanical method like powdered sugar dusting, drone frames, and screen bottom boards, and you're going to dust them with powdered sugar every 2 weeks year round? So be realistic with yourself about what you know how to do and what you're able to do. Next, know the pros and cons and risks around each method. Just remember, nothing is not an option. And 3, varying classes of chemicals ranging from synthetic to natural ingredients. Just keep in mind that natural ingredients don't always translate to better for you or your bees. Oxalic acid vapor is a great example. You're vaporizing an acid. Pretty tough on you as a human, and they can be tough on your bees depending on if you're applying it correctly. So just keep in mind that just because it's natural doesn't mean it's necessarily safe. What I recommend is an integrated pest management approach to all the methods. So, you know, start out with genetics that are good. You know, that's critical in all of beekeeping. You know, queens that are good, that are somewhat mite resistant, that's a starting point. Then when that doesn't work in most cases, as those mite levels start to climb, you know, you can move to using some mechanical methods, brood breaks, drone frames, screen bottom boards, powdered sugar, heat treatments. Those are all good things to try. But keep in mind, there's a good chance if you're new to beekeeping, they aren't going to work until you really hone down that process and you put the work into it. So test those options, try them out. They work for some beekeepers. But if you're new to beekeeping, I would jump kind of straight up to organic chemicals or conventional pesticides until you really learn what you're doing in the world of beekeeping. Then maybe experiment a little more with the mechanical methods. So organic chemicals would be formic acid, oxalic acid, HopGuard, Apiguard. The tough thing, and I hate saying this, but the tough thing about these organic chemicals, they just don't work in the heat, and they often don't work when there's a ton of brood in the hive. You know, formic acid, you know, you can't use that when it's really hot. Apiguard, the thymol-based treatment, doesn't do well. It can drive the bees right out of the hive when it's too hot. HopGuard doesn't work very well when there's a lot of brood in the hive. Oxalic acid vaporizer doesn't work very well when there's a ton of brood in the hive. Neither does the dribble method. There is some promising stuff coming out increasingly about the glycerin-soaked pads, glycerin and oxalic acid soaked pads, but the research isn't conclusive yet. I would experiment with it, but wouldn't rely on it exclusively just yet. If you're going to use a chemical control method in the summer in the Texas, you're kind of stuck with Amitraz, which is Apivar. It's the strip you put in, not it's Apivar, not I'm blanking on the name of the old treatment that doesn't work anymore. It's fluvalinate. It's a strip that you know is very old that you would never want to put in your hives anymore. You're going for the active. You want the active ingredient Amitraz. It's Apivar. You don't want fluvalinate. It's another. I can't believe I've blanked out on it. It's been so long since I've used it. Anyway, don't use fluvalinate. Use the Amitraz, and it does work quite well in the summer months. Okay, so in the about 10 minutes or so I've got left, we're going to jump off of Varroa mites. So that's a quick overview. If you're brand new to beekeeping, that's really overwhelming for you. I probably left you with more questions than answers I just provided. And that's because it's a really big topic to cover in 15 minutes. So if you're brand new to beekeeping, check out our class that you can get on our website. And it'll walk you through in much more detail everything I just touched on. The other resource I'm going to point you towards is the Honeybee Health Coalition Varroa tool. So Google Honeybee Health Coalition Varroa tool, and it's going to bring you to a quiz that it's going to ask you all these different questions about your bees, how strong your hive is, what time of year it is, do you want to be natural, organic, do you want to use chemicals, and then it will recommend the best mite treatments for you. And it'll show you a video on how to use that mite treatment. It's a fantastic tool. So check out our class on our website, check out the Honeybee Health Coalition. And if you're new to beekeeping, those two resources will give you all the information you need to control Varroa mites. So, okay, so let's talk about the heat a little bit. So it's hot outside, as many of you have already noticed. Adding boxes during the summer. When should you stop adding supers? And the answer is when the honey flow stops, which was a couple weeks ago. So we don't need to add supers anymore for honey production. That's over. We're done. If your hive is just one deep box, or if like the video that we saw earlier, if both of your brood boxes are completely full of bees, if it's kind of looking like this on the right, or if it's looking like that video, that hive in the video that we saw that was just really full up in that second brood box, I would add another box. I'm not expecting the bees to put anything in it. It's just a heat barrier. And we'll pull that box right back off if it's not full of bees, when it cools off in late September or early October. But if your hive's just one deep box, you definitely need a second box. And if you have two brood boxes and they're both really full of bees, throw another box on there. And that'll help keep them cooler. Okay, this is really important. What do your bees need to grow and thrive over the summer? And grow might be a stretch this year because it's so hot, but they need protein, which is pollen. They need a variety of pollen. They need carbs, which is nectar or syrup. They need to be largely free of mites, under 2 per 100 bees. They need to be largely free of brood diseases, and they need a healthy, vibrant queen. So, if you just got a new hive or requeened or made splits this spring, you should have a healthy, vibrant queen. Brood disease, I don't see, it's very rare to see brood disease this time of year. Most brood diseases in the South are a problem when it's cool and damp, definitely not cool and damp. So the bottom two, typically not an issue in the summer. Mites are a big deal and food is a big deal. So we talked about mites, let's talk about bees. So you can have fat bees versus skinny bees. Skinny bees are bees that have not had a proper nutrition given to them and their fat cells shrink and it really affects their immune system. And one of the biggest feed sources for bees is pollen. And so this picture on the left, this is what I see this time of year with pollen. It's kind of just a sprinkling of pollen stored amongst the worker bee brood. On the right, in the springtime, we often see these full frames of pollen, which is just beautiful. That's one of the reasons our hives grow so much. In the summer, when we start to see the pollen stores dwindle, here's a really helpful tip to see if your hive has nutrition that they need. So when you look at developing larvae in your hive that are 24 to 36 hours old, they should be literally floating in a pool of royal jelly like you see on the right here. If you look at these on the left, they just look very dry. There's see very little to no royal jelly underneath those larvae. And that's a sign that they're nutritionally starved. The bees don't have enough royal jelly and bee bread to feed those developing bees. Now, I hear what you're saying. How on earth am I supposed to see that? I can't see eggs. I have a hard time seeing larvae. How am I supposed to be looking at the pool of royal jelly? These pictures were just taken with a smartphone and then zoomed up later. So kind of like seeing eggs, take a picture with your smartphone, a bunch of pictures, and then go inside your house where it's dark and really zoom up. That's how you can spot whether or not they're floating in royal jelly. So that's a quick tip to see how your hive's doing nutritionally. If they're dry, got to get some syrup on them, need to give them some pollen substitute as well. A quick note on well-fed versus overfed. So this frame on the right, this is a well-fed hive. You can see they've got, oops, sorry, not having good luck with videos today. You can see that they've got, brood in the middle, and they've got a healthy band of honey around the outside edge. The picture on the left here, you can see that they have actually backfilled the brood nest. There used to be cat brood in here, and they filled the brood nest area with nectar or syrup and kind of crowded the queen out. And we don't want that this time of year. We want to make sure the queen has plenty of room to lay. And so I want to see, 5, 6, 7 frames with a lot of brood on them through the summer. And if you're feeding them so much that they're down to 2 or 3 frames of brood, and all the other frames are just packed out with this open syrup, you got to back off on the feeding a little bit. One of the ways I like to prevent overfeeding and filling out the brood nest is practicing trickle feeding, and for pollen substitute and sugar syrup. And for pollen substitute, that looks like feeding 2 1-pound pollen patties per month. And you don't want to feed more pollen than the bees can eat in about 1 week. So if I've got a strong hive that's a deep box full of bees or more, I'm going to give them a 1-pound pollen patty. I'm going to give it 10 days or so. I'm going to come back, make sure they've eaten all their pollen patty, and I'll give them another one. If they haven't eaten their pollen patty, I'll pull it out, throw it in the freezer for a couple of days to kill any small hive beetle larvae, and then put it back on the hive. For sugar syrup, I like to feed 1/4 to 1/2 of gallon of sugar water, about 1-to-1 sugar water per week, until that second brood box has 30 pounds of stored sugar or syrup in their second brood box. And by giving them small amounts of food throughout the summer, they're not going to overfill the brood nest, and it's going to more closely simulate a natural nectar flow, and it's going to encourage that queen to keep laying. So trickle feeding is the way to go. I get it. That's not practical for some of you that don't live near beehives. And if you don't live anywhere close to your bees, then just visit them every 2 weeks, put a pollen patty on there, give them a gallon of syrup, and visit them again in a couple of weeks. So this is just summer care tips. Maintain that 30 to 40 pounds of surplus in the second box. 30 pounds is a medium box, 90% full, or 1 deep box, 2/3 full. Test for mites now, and you're probably going to need to treat for mites. Feed 2 pollen patties each month starting now. I don't usually recommend this. Usually I say, hey, start mid to late August. It's getting awfully hot and dry out there. I would recommend go ahead once you pull your honey, throw a pollen patty on there. It's not going to hurt them, and it's going to help in a lot of areas. And then you can equalize brood between hives if needed. If you've got a really strong hive and a really weak hive, then you can equalize some brood. And we've talked about that extensively in our other webinars. So keeping hives cool, we've talked about that several times, but screen bottom boards help. Gives the bees a lot more ventilation. Cracking the lid back a little bit can help as well to give them an upper ventilation entrance. Got to be careful with that. If the bees get really robby, you don't want to open up that lid too much. My preferred method is to just slightly crack between the telescoping cover and the inner cover to give bees a little bit of airflow. And then you can put an empty box or a box full of frames on top of your box, and then put the lid on top of that. Kind of creates a dead air space and a barrier between the hot sun, which is very helpful. And then providing some sources of shade can be really, really helpful. I don't mind my bees being in near full shade over the summer. I wouldn't leave them there during the fall and winter and spring. Ideal is afternoon shade, and then the rest of the year they're in the full sun. And if you're really worried, if it's really brutally hot, then you can put up some sort of a shade screen over the hive. A strong, healthy hive, like I mentioned earlier, does a great job of thermoregulating themselves no matter what conditions are. The weaker hives have a much harder time. The times I've seen weaker hives, less than a deep box full of bees just melt away in 110-degree weather, is in single-story hives that are weak. That's when you really get into trouble. Okay, last poll real quick. And and I'm just super curious. How do you keep your hives cool? I'm curious if you guys do anything at all. And I'm just curious if you do something, what do you do? So the questions are, you don't do anything. The bees take care of themselves when it comes to keeping your hives cool. You put them in full sun, you put them in full or partial shade. You make sure they have at least 2 boxes. You create artificial shade for them, or you do something else. So just curious. I mean, a lot of beekeepers do nothing at all. And as long as it's a strong hive and they've got at least 2 boxes, they do great on their own. So I'm just curious. Let's see. Okay, still results are coming in, but we're seeing some winners. Looks like about, and this is multiple choice, so these percentages are a little off. 23% say I don't do anything. The bees take care of themselves. 40% say I put them in full or partial shade. 54% say I make sure they have at least 2 boxes. 8% create artificial shade, and 18% do something else. So hey, that 18% that does something else, you should put it in the chat box or something. Let us know what else you do. But that's super interesting. So it looks like most of you either let the bees, well, most of you put them in full or partial shade, or make sure they have at least 2 boxes, which all those things work. So we've talked about that already. I'm going to try to hustle along so we can turn it over to the Elams for mean bees. Robbing, this is a quick video of robbing behavior. I'm just going to show you guys it real quick. Might be loud, so cover your ears just in case. There, it wasn't too bad. So this is robbing behavior. You can see the bees are just frantically clustering along the cracks of the hive. You know, if that's happening to your hive, you can reduce down the entrance a little bit. A lot of people turn on the sprinklers. If you got them in your yard, turn on the sprinklers for a few hours, and that makes all the bees go away and go in. You can cover everything but the entrance with a damp sheet. That works as well. But in general, a strong hive should be able to take care of themselves. So we've got lots of past resources and articles in our magazine and articles on our website about robbing. Last thing, provide a water source for your bees. As those natural water sources dry up, they're going to need some water source. Make sure your water source is in partial shade. If it's in full sun, it's too hot for the bees. And make sure the water source has a way to keep the bees from drowning. So, okay, with that, James and Sherry, you're up. And guys, I'm going to jump over to the Q&A box and answer any questions that you guys have. And I am going to turn this over to James and Sherry to talk about mean bees. And take it away, guys.
Hi.
Thanks, Blake.
Man, you are cutting us close.
Yeah, you are. You know what? If
I'm sorry, guys.
That box,
Take the time you need.
That's all right. That's all right. We're good.
If we were the bees inside that box being robbed and we survived, we would be what we would call mean bees.
Oh my gosh, so true. So I hope you can see us. I can't see us. So let me see if, oh, you can kind of see us. Can you see James? Get over. There you are. Okay. Hi, y'all. Man, 84 questions. So good questions too. We're going to talk about mean bees. So
mean bees is a fun topic because we have a lot of experience with that. And I'm sure that most beekeepers that have been around for a while have done as well.
We shouldn't have a lot, but we do.
Let's jump into it.
We will jump into it. So let's talk about what normal behavior is. So normal behavior in your bee yard is, are bees flying around once you crack the lid? There's bees flying around. It's going to happen. It doesn't mean there's going to be a lot of them. But look at this picture that I just popped up there. There's a lot on the front of that box, but that really is normal for what we were doing that day.
They're still bees with a purpose.
Yeah.
They're still bees that are foraging for nectar and pollen.
They're not going crazy.
They're building wax and everything's going. They may be in the air because they're going like, what are y'all doing?
But they're not crazy.
It's still normal.
That's normal. That's normal. Abnormal. And we had to share this picture. This is some friends, very dear friends of ours, Roy and Karen Morse. And these bees were not happy. This is the mean bee category. Okay. They were not happy with us today, but and apparently we thought it was funny and took a picture, but you're not going to normally want to see that many bees flying around you if you're just doing just regular hive inspections. So that's where this program comes from. So let's start about what agitation triggers are.
That would be an agitation trigger. Don't do handstands on your bees. You know, bees typically react to the situations that we provide for them. And sometimes the things we do in our colonies are very much like doing handstands on top of our bees. And they don't appreciate that.
No, they don't. So being, kind of gentle with them will make a big difference. We'll talk about that again real quick in a minute.
I love the aggressive inspections.
Ooh.
Sometimes we're so focused on what we're doing that we're not focused on what we should be doing.
So true.
We're trying to move so fast to get through our bees that we're ignoring the little techniques we learned along the way to keep bees calm.
So true. Improper use of smoke. It's really important we use smoke properly. Several puffs at the entrance, then pop your lid, and several more puffs under the lid. You can even, some folks will close that lid back for a minute or so, so the two shall join, giving the bees time to really and truly get smoked, and then open the box. But use your smoker as your friend. It's not going to do a lot of good to do the air. I can tell you, some folks do that.
It's funny to watch that. It'd be like coming back behind our acrobat here and trying to calm the bees by smoking the air. Yeah. It's not going to work. All that does is make your smoker hot.
Could do that. Alarm pheromone on your bee suit, and we believe very strongly in this because we've had experience with it. That when we got into a hot hive, that we had a lot of stingers on our gloves and in our veil and so forth. And then we go to the next colony or the next bee yard, and the bees are not happy because what's on there? It's alarm pheromone, and it's just like knocking on their door going, we're already going to upset you before we even get started. So really, if you can, depending on how many hives you have, go in with a semi-clean suit, at least not one full of stingers of an event.
Agitation trigger.
That's right, agitation. Here's another agitation trigger.
Dearth would be an agitation trigger for certain. Robbing, like Blake showed a minute ago.
Yeah. That's right. I get to that.
Seasonal changes.
Okay, hold on. You're getting ahead.
Well, we got time to make it.
You're right. So predators. Let's go predators next. If you've got predators, we call them raccoons, in your bee yard, they may sit there with the little paws and going in at night, kind of pestering the bees. So the next day they're kind of agitated. It could be a problem. All right, what did James just say? Robbing. And that video is not, it's on video, but that's not near as good as what what Blake did. All right, season changes. I wanted to put on a snow picture too, Blake. Makes us cool inside, doesn't it? Extreme temperature changes will agitate our bees. They don't really know what to do about that.
And not only the season changing itself, but the effects on nature that the season changes have.
True.
It's kind of like it's deer season or it's fishing spawn season. When that ends, the whole world is like in a panic. Well, when nectar flow stops for our bees, they panic. You talk about an attitude change.
It is. And that's from nectar flow to dearth. Says Correct. Exactly what we're talking about. And weather. I love this picture. It's one of Blake's, I'm going to say many pictures that he has that I have access to. And if you've got a storm coming or one that has passed, your bees are going to know it. They have that little innate ability to sense bad weather, whether it's coming even near them or not. So that could be a trigger. Let's go to the next set. Could be the queen. You could be queenless.
Queenless colony is an unhappy colony.
Very, very.
A queen that has genetics that are not beneficial to the beekeeper is an agitation trigger to the beekeeper. Hey, like that.
I like that. And this picture, I want everybody to look at this picture. This is James lots of years ago when he still wore a cotton suit and a round veil. These bees were not happy bees, and we did believe that they had Africanized tendencies. They will cover your veil. They covered his head in that, obviously, by that picture. But that could be an agitation trigger, right?
We firmly believe that extremely large hive have the tendencies to be more defensive or even aggressive than smaller colonies. True. Because they do have the same common goal. They're not just trying to push us around. They're trying to push us out. So with that common goal, they could be very successful.
Power in numbers. It's like with any species, the more of them, the tougher they are. So it could be that just reducing the sizes of your hives could help with taking that trigger away.
You know, that will naturally happen this time of year as the nectar flow has stopped. So as hive populations will begin to decline. But that is a huge factor to consider if a colony is too aggressive or defensive.
That's true. Other factors, number of hives in a single location. We know this personally. We had a location that was, well, I'll just tell you exactly. It had 12 hives, and it liked those 12 hives. We added about another dozen, I don't remember, several hives, and all of a sudden they went from all sweet bees to none of them sweet bees, and it had to do with forage. So that mattered. So when we took that addition and moved it to another bee yard, it corrected it for that location. So it could be number of hives in a single
location. I think
location.
the colonies individually knew something immediately changed, and that their success ratio, from as simple as bringing in nectar to building wax, all of a sudden everything declined.
True.
The pollen wasn't there for everybody, and they just kind of went stagnant. And in doing so, they got mad at us.
Yeah, they did.
And they told us.
They did. So we divided them. We separated those kids and made them go a different direction.
Little twerps.
Little twerps. Nectar flow. I think we all know that if you mess with your hives too much during nectar flow, they are not happy with this. Time of day, that would be when everybody's home. If the foragers aren't out, then it could be that. If it's a cloudy day, even, it could be that. So time of day could make a difference. And James said that nobody's gonna know that's him, but
well, why did you tell?
That's him. This is early again. I love our new beekeeping pictures.
Those really weren't mean bees.
They weren't, but that's a funny picture.
I was creating one of those scenes of standing in front of the hive. Obviously, they couldn't find their way around me.
I will tell you, there was, I believe, five hives on this stand. This was a lot of years ago, so I have to remember. 5 hives on this stand, and the one on the very end was a mean hive. And we lived with it. I'm gonna tell you why we lived with it, because they were wonderful honey producers and bee producers. We made, I don't know how many splits we made off of that hive. Split after split after split, and made tons of honey, literally. So we lived with those mean bees, and we've had a lot of mean bees since then.
Watch this.
He's telling me hurry up. No, we're good. We're good. Look.
Well, I know that living with mean bees is no fun.
It's not.
Beekeeping should be fun, and it shouldn't be stressful.
Right.
Especially for hobby beekeepers, it shouldn't be stressful. Stressful bee, if you're stressed about your bees, then your neighbors are probably going to be stressed about your bees.
So
They kind of go hand in hand, don't they?
But you can live with them if you can live with them. Okay. We're giving you that permission if you need it. So we did, and we do. Some of our hives are not the sweetest. Environmental issues. There could be environmental impacts. We lived next to, we were there first, but we lived next to a dirt pit that moved in and a concrete pit that moved in next to us. And all of a sudden, those environmental impacts impacted our hives. Their forage area, it was 150 acres that almost surrounded us. It affected them. So if you can correct that, which we did,
we moved.
Bees and all.
Yeah.
Then great. So
well, if you picture dust completely covering a flower, which is your nectar and pollen source, and if it covers one, it's covering thousands.
True.
And that's where our bees are foraging. Then that does impact them, and it does reduce nectar. It makes mean bees.
Yeah. So you could manage. You could change that requeening. I think that we all probably thought that. At least those of us that have been here a minute, that we know requeening can change the genetics. And so many times that makes a huge difference. If you don't know how to requeen your hive, we have a video for that. Go to Texas Bee Supply YouTube channel and just type in requeening. And I promise you, we've got more than one to tell you how to requeen. It will most always make a difference.
Would you change that slide?
I'm sorry, moving. One more.
That's just my rear end.
I know, but it's funny. Everybody's laughing with me.
I know.
So moving, kind of like we moved
Time to
away from
move.
our environmental issues. You may need to move your bees. They may need to move from
You
their
know, we did
location.
that one hive that was
Mhm.
that we enjoyed so much that was truly Africanized.
Yeah,
That's a segue into the next.
yeah.
We
yeah,
know they were Africanized,
Yeah,
but they were so plentiful
yeah,
that we just moved them, isolated them in another portion of the bee yard
we did.
and let them survive. And they kept doing well at it.
They did, but they were away from the rest of our bees. And just a kind of a note to self for you, or put a pin in this. If you want to live with the mean bees, that's fine, because again, we do sometimes, is that inspect it last. Keep it away from your other bees and inspect it last, because you don't want to get them agitated and then work all the sweet colonies, okay? We really don't want mean bees, but it does happen from time to time. We couldn't help but throw this in there, identify an Africanized hive and what to do about it. The top right picture shows you, now it's 2011, so that was 11 years ago, so obviously we're a little outdated, but that is the spread of Africanized honeybees by year, by county. You can see the bottom portion of the US, a lot of us have been impacted by that Africanized honeybee. They are virtually impossible to spot. In other words, I can't look at you and say you're Africanized. The bee picture on the bottom right is actually supposed to be a picture of an Africanized bee.
Looks just like our European bee to me.
Can you spot the difference? I think the eyes look a little browner than our bees, but you know, my eyes are brown, so what do I know? There's not really, you can't tell, all right? They are less particular about their housing. I've read that they tend to move into places like, not all, but some meter boxes might be Africanized bees. They just aren't, they're nomadic. So they're less
That's
likely.
the correct word. They're nomadic.
Yeah.
They move along with the nectar flow, and that's their goal. They don't store a lot of honey typically,
Right.
and they're on the move.
They tend to swarm more and abscond more. Abscond, for those that don't know, means leave. I'm leaving. Easily agitated, understatement. Not as reactive to smoke, understatement.
Yeah.
Not big honey producers. You said that. They really, really and truly are.
We used to so commonly say that honeybees are defensive, not aggressive, but we have modified that in thinking that the European honeybee is not aggressive, it's defensive. Africanized bees are aggressive.
They are.
They're not just defensive.
And
did y'all see what she did to me?
I did. Did you see that? I can talk longer. Real quick, I want to tell you that Africanized bees actually first time in the US, 1990. Just FYI, and that was because earlier on 1956, 57, they kind of escaped from South America and from Brazil, to be specific, and migrated up. So just FYI. What to do? We want to requeen as quickly as possible, and or make multiple splits. It's very difficult to find a queen to pinch her out of an Africanized hive. Been there, done that. It's very hard. So James is just king at making 10 splits out of a bad hive.
Well, when Sherry says split, she means separating.
Yeah,
It's not a split, we're separating boxes. So we've reduced the power in numbers.
Yes.
And it makes it easier to find the queen
Yeah.
as well.
Quarantine away from other hives, that goes without saying.
That's so important, because when those bees get upset,
Yes,
they start covering the face of your other boxes
They
that you're
do.
working.
they do.
And that's the importance of working your meanest hives last.
Elimination. We can't go without saying that, you know, it's really not okay that Africanized hives are around. They drone, they make drones, okay? And that will contaminate our drone population, which when we have a homegrown queen from time to time, you get the point. So consider this, or Google it if it's something you're interested in. Elimination is very much part of beekeeping when we have a true Africanized hive. Protective gear. This is a very cute picture that James caught of me. We were helping secure a very loose ankle band around that suit. It's important that you are buttoned up, all right? That way you don't have to worry about bees getting inside and giving you a
Yeah, it's kind of like, are your bees out to get you?
Yes.
Do they boil out the front of your hive just at your presence?
I'm going to be prepared.
It may be that there's a reason for your presence as opposed to my presence.
Right. Presence, P-R-E-N
Presence.
with a C.
That's right.
Other essentials.
That's where it
Technique.
comes in. That's the
It does.
technique I'm talking about.
Technique, yeah.
We talked about it
Yeah.
earlier too. We really need to work with purpose and finesse
Yeah.
and stop killing bees.
That
You know,
does matter.
I'm a firm believer
Yeah.
that a newly born bee learns from its sisters. And if its sisters are constantly on guard for attack for that James Elam face, that when the baby bee sees the sister bee look at me and turn in fear,
Yeah.
then they learn that behavior. I believe that. I believe
It's him.
some of mean
He's the one.
bees is learned behavior.
It
So
can be.
take that in stride.
Yeah, work with purpose. Go in with confidence. Really and truly, bees do sense fear. You're bigger. You're in a suit. You're protected. Go in, get your business done. Do it with purpose and get out of there.
And
You
you know,
can
it's
do
so much
this.
easier to do it with purpose and speed when you're suited up fully.
Look,
We finished on
7:59,
time.
and this is a picture of us. What year? 2020, pulling supers, and it was 105
At the
degrees.
Dayton store.
At the Dayton store, 105 degrees, and it was hot. It was hot.
Thank
All
you.
right, James, see, I call Blake James Blake.
We'll answer to anything. It's okay. Thank you guys. And I apologize for leaving you such little time. That was fantastic information. Thanks for getting through it so quickly. So, well, folks, watch for our email that'll follow up and have a recording to this webinar. It'll have links to all the videos, links to the magazine. And we cannot wait to see you in August. Hopefully it cools off a little bit, and we'll be talking about more winter preparation, and we'll probably have some guest speakers in August and September as well. If you have any suggestions on guest speakers, let us know, and we would love to hear your suggestions. But if you have any more questions, put them in the Q&A box. We'll be more than happy to answer those. And until then, stay cool, and we'll see you in August.